And he was like, why on earth aren't you in tech sales? Like, that's where you need to move. And so I thought, oh, you know what, that probably sounds sensible. So made the move over to Darktrace about 5 years ago now. The biggest deal I've personally ever done, and one of the biggest in EMEA, yeah, exactly. So super excited to chat about that today. It took about 18 months to do. It was a 4 million TCV, 1 million ACV contract for just one part of our solution. So lots of good upsell opportunity there as well. We had spoken to the champion earlier in the year in April 2021. He'd said, look, too many projects ongoing at the moment, but really keen to have a chat with Darktrace, but reach out after the summer. So Ted did exactly that, booked me a meeting in September 2021, and then the rest is history, I guess. It went from there. There was a really interesting moment, actually, where the technical champion told Alex some information which explained as to why our champion was slightly distracted for a couple of weeks because there was a big project. And like, that's the kind of thing that if we didn't have the relationship with the technical champion, we'd never have known. And then you get people worrying internally, like maybe something's gone wrong, but actually it made sense because, you know, we got a good understanding that he had a massive other project that was completing in the 2-week process where he was a bit quiet for us.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Elite Dealers. Today I am with Harriet MacEacharn, and as you might guess, I've been practicing a lot on pronouncing that last name. I'm not unfamiliar with it, having a bit of a tricky last name myself, but Harriet, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to have a chat today. It'll be good.
Yeah, and so, hey, you're currently with Darktrace, right? But you used to sell vending machines at one point, right? So that's a bit of a journey.
Exactly, vending and coffee machines and the coffee that would go in the coffee machines. So a whole big journey to get here.
So how did that happen, that transition?
So I basically, one of my friend's dads worked for IBM, and I've been at the vending machine company for 3 years. And I was like, oh, I'm having a good time. It's going well. And he was like, why on earth aren't you in tech sales? Like, that's where you need to move. And so I thought, oh, you know what, that probably sounds sensible. So made the move over to Darktrace about 5 years ago now.
Right. And it seems sensible looking back at it, right? Because you did one of like the key deals in EMEA, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the biggest deal I've personally ever done, and one of the biggest in EMEA. Yeah, exactly. So super excited to chat about that today.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, so, context of the deal. Can you give us like the high level track of this deal?
Absolutely. So it took about 18 months to do. It was a 4 million TCV, 1 million ACV contract for just one part of our solution. So lots of good upsell opportunity there as well. But yeah, it was a lot of work and effort went in, but I'm excited to chat about it today. One of the things to note is that obviously Darktrace only just started with MEDDPICC. So we only started in August 2023 to learn MEDDPICC, and it's been a super exciting journey so far. But none of the deal had anything like MEDDPICC didn't exist for me. So I didn't know how to apply it correctly, but it's been a really good exercise to look backwards and see how loads of the stuff that we did works with MEDDPICC, just has different words. And it's nice to be able to like correlate between the two and see how actually MEDDPICC was a huge part of the process and how in the future I can learn how to use it more successfully, hopefully.
Right. I mean, that is a great sort of setup for the rest of this conversation, right? Because what I'm hearing you say is almost like retrospectively, looking through the MEDDPICC lens, you are able to understand some of the things that went really well in that deals, and then as part of using MEDDPICC as a common language, replicate them going forward. Would that be fair to say?
It's exactly that, yeah. And also nice to be able to talk about it like internally with my team and work out who the champion was, who the economic buyer was. And it's very clearly there. And the people, and the processes aligned, like the decision process or paper process. It makes sense, but it's nice to be able to apply MEDDPICC to it retrospectively. And yeah, again, moving forward to other deals, I'll be able to use that now in the correct way.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's use this lens for the next couple of minutes, talking about this deal. How did it first come about? Was it outbound, inbound? Where did it start?
Yeah, outbound from my BDR, Ted Blackburn-Mays, so definitely big shout out to him. We had spoken to the champion earlier in the year in April 2021. He'd said, look, too many projects ongoing at the moment, but really keen to have a chat with Darktrace, but reach out after the summer. So Ted did exactly that, booked me a meeting in September 2021, and then the rest is history, I guess. It went from there.
Oh, I mean, I love that. I think, like you said, big shout out to Ted there. Would it be fair to say that this deal wouldn't have happened without the outbound motion from?
Yeah, definitely not. Like, the BDRs that work at Darktrace, they're absolutely unbelievable at what they do. And they work on so many more accounts than we do as account executives and account directors. So he definitely had his eye on that account and went for it and, kept on top of it over the summer when maybe other people could have had a look at it. So yeah, he definitely, without the deal, we wouldn't have had, without Ted, we wouldn't have had the deal.
Oh, I love that. Well, go Ted, right?
Exactly.
So, and the thing that we like to do in these conversations in particular is really break it down to what we refer to as the pillars of professional selling, right?
Yes.
Stakeholders being the first, process being the second, and value being the third. Not always in that order, but I think, looking at the dynamics of this particular deal, that does make sense. So if we think about stakeholders and that outbound motion, the ultimate primary champion, looking back at it now, is that the first person that engaged with him?
Yeah, exactly. And he was head of security for both IT and OT. So he's the right person, the right contact. And in a company as large as the company we're speaking about, they sometimes, I'd speak with a CISO at that level and it kind of equals out. But yeah, he was exactly the right person to have met at the very beginning, and he championed us the whole way through. Once we got into sort of the buying process and everything, he took a bit of a step back because the right people were with us for those moments. But he was the champion from the very first meeting to the closing of the deal.
The question to you here is hey, when did you know that this person was in fact your champion? What did they do, or what showed you that they were in fact your champion?
Yeah. So we met with him. He then straight away said, I want to bring in more people, which I think is always a good sign. I think if you're meeting one person at a company, that's never a good option. You want to have multiple champions. And in this case, he brought in more champions, who then almost my technical counterpart, Alex, who also deserves a massive shout out, he would then align with those champions a bit more. So it worked out really nicely to have sort of multi-threading. I think that in April 2022, we got assigned a project manager, and I knew that would have been pushed for by the champion. He would have got that project manager assigned. And that for me was a big indicator that he was really championing this project. To have someone assigned to be looking at this and running the proof of value, the legal pieces, the paperwork, the processes, that makes me seem that they're very much interested, and that's a huge indication of a buying sign for me. So, and he championed that the whole way through, as I said. And when it got to the stage where we needed to meet the economic buyer, he was the one introducing us to him. The whole way through, he was doing all the right things for me in terms of being a champion.
Yeah, I love that, because when we think about champions, one of the things that isn't just coming about is power and influence, right? That a champion needs to have. Without it, they can still be a good coach, right? They can coach you on how to win, sometimes introduce you to some of the other stakeholders. But getting that EB meeting is something that the champion does really need to have power and influence for. And you cannot give it necessarily to them unless, like Andy always says, unless you're Tony Robbins. But I guess we're, both not in that category, if you know what I mean. Something that I really want to pick up on here is the multi-threading, because that goes both ways, right? That is on the customer side as well as on the Darktrace side in this case. How did that work from your perspective in this deal?
So the original champion was probably the person who I spoke with more. Then we had the two champions who were head of IT and head of OT. And that's where Alex, my technical counterpart, was amazing with them. His relationship was so good with them, that made a big difference. And then within their team, there was multiple coaches who were being enthusiastic as well. But when we got to the kind of stages of, talking about the proof of value and the buying process, we then also aligned from my side a guy called Max, who's our chief product officer, who's unbelievable. And he was then assigned to sort of be the multi-threaded assignment to our economic buyer. So ultimately another champion who was helping us. But yeah, there was multiple stages where people at Darktrace were talking with different champions. And that, I think, is such an important part of a project where you have multiple people from your business and their business talking together.
Yeah, we hear it all the time, right? It really takes a village to get something like this done. And the two things specifically here is Alex, your SE, I guess shout out to Alex as well, right? It's like and I don't know if this happened at any point in this deal, but sometimes you see that engagement goes a little bit down. There's suddenly like no communication, like having that multi-thread, and for Alex to be able to reach out to the technical champion, that's like a massive change maker, right? If you can do that, to understand where you are and get from a place of uncertainty to confidence by having that multi-thread to rely on.
Yeah, there was actually one stage really quite late in the deal where we were, because they bought they were tendering for a SOC at the same time. There was a really interesting moment actually where the technical champion told Alex some information which explained as to why our champion was slightly distracted for a couple of weeks because there was a big project. And like that's the kind of thing that if we didn't have the relationship with the technical champion, we'd never have known. And then you get people worrying internally, like maybe something's gone wrong. But actually it made sense because, we got a good understanding that he had a massive other project that was completing in the 2-week process where he was a bit quiet for us.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes so much sense. And then the other, what I would call elite move that you guys, I want to say pulled, but that sounds negative. You sort of proactively took at the time was early EB engagement, right? Aligning a senior stakeholder in your team to the proposed EB, I suppose at that time, because doing that early on creates this engagement that you can always rely on later on.
Exactly, yeah. And it was literally just as simple as Max sent an email to the EB and just saying, look, really, really pleased that we're having these conversations. Anything I can do to support, let me know. It was really light touch and it just really landed well. And he actually replied straight away being like, really pleased that we're having these conversations as well. Looking forward to speaking in a few weeks when we had a planned meeting. So yeah, it was just a really nice touch. Yeah,
absolutely. And then Harriet, you mentioned the proof of value, right? And I think that and it's a nice segue into like the value pillar of the kind of pillars that we're looking at here, and then particularly decision criteria. Because at what point did you start shaping this in the sales cycle in general, and what role did the proof of value play in that?
Yeah, so Jordan, my commercial director, that's what we've always planned that, at Darktrace, we would call it success criteria. So very similar to decision criteria. We call it that and we've been doing that for a long time. And that, when I was doing the training, really stuck out as something we've done for a long time, which is a different word. So he was very keen that we get that up and running, and he joins the kind of wider conversation when we get to the proof of value stage. So he led that, which was really helpful. We then had conversations with the IT guy and the OT guy to both make success or decision process, criteria outlined, value criteria, so that both of them were, and then we'd send it as a summary. And that was a really important part of the process. And it meant we could constantly reflect back on it because as we've learned, like that process is ever growing and ever changing. And it's important to always keep in touch and make sure that they agree, yes, we've hit on this one and now we're moving on to this section here.
Yeah, absolutely. And to influence the decision criteria, which is ultimately how the customer makes decisions, right? So it's a massive change maker in how we approach deals proactively. And it sounds like the way that you are thinking about it is exactly that, right? Because I think that in our industry, people often think like, decision criteria, we need to qualify the way that the customer is making their decision, the criteria that they're basing their decision on. But they're not professionals in like cybersecurity, right? They spend 95% of their time on other things. So you need to be there with them, become the trusted advisor to get to a consensus on what's good for solving the pain that they have that is important enough to solve for, right?
And we did exactly that. We made because the guys were like, oh, we haven't done that before. And what we did was actually create a template and say, look, this is what other people have used previously to measure Darktrace's success. Would you like for us to base the conversation around this? And then it was a really natural flow into actually, that fits exactly why we're doing this project. And that is a pain point for us. And we naturally created then a really good decision process or decision criteria for them to align against.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And so if we think about backing that up with how you've done it before, right? That's the proof essentially in by way of the MEDDPICC framework, we typically think about an M1, right? Which is the quantifiable impact you've delivered for a current customer, armed with decision criteria. So the how. Did you at any point get one of your current customers in as well to back you up?
Yes. So actually, this was really interesting. They I think that the industry they're in is quite small. So they have this conference every year, and the head of the IT team messaged one of our Darktrace customers, and he knows him from being in the same industry. And he was like, "Look, we're starting to think about doing a Darktrace proof of value. Do you guys recommend it? Is there any questions? Can I jump on a quick call?" And this customer of ours is actually our very first ever customer at Darktrace, and he jumped on with him and had a great conversation. Messaged me afterwards, or messaged the account director who looks after them, and he was like, "These guys are super interested." And it was a really natural thing to have happened. And it's great that they had that kind of confidence from the customer, who has been a customer for 10 years now, that they were doing the right thing by starting the proof of value project. But it wasn't us who led them to get to that conversation, which is a shame. But they did, that was a natural conversation that they had.
Well, I think two things there. First and foremost, if your first ever customer is there with you to provide that reference that much further in time, like you're doing a great job on value delivery, right? So that's the first compliment to the business, I suppose. And then the second thing is it's going back to the beginning of the conversation that you and I are having today, because right now, looking through the MEDDPICC lens, you can repurpose that into a more proactive motion going forward, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Awesome.
Completely agree.
Okay, lovely. So I think that what we will move on to is the process pillar here. And then what I think that we are particularly interested in is getting an understanding about how you went about that, whether it was proactive, because from a sales process perspective, we tend to think about the paper process, the decision process to come late on in our sales cycles, right? Mm-hmm. We only start thinking about it once we become like vendor of choice, when there's like a serious kind of show that, well, we might end up winning this deal. But what we learn time and time again is that the best deals, both from like a revenue perspective as from a success perspective, these things are more proactively, right? So what can you tell us about the way that you guys went about this with this deal?
It was very important for us to have those conversations in parallel, and that's something that Darktrace has done very well, I think, from the beginning, or in the 5 years I've been here, because timing-wise, we were coming out to the end of our financial year. So like 3 or 4 months in advance, we're starting these conversations, because there's no way you can have a legal process, in a 2 week, when they say, yes, we're going with you guys, and it's 2 weeks to the end of the financial year, there's no way we can get all that done. So we asked for introductions to not only the legal department, but also the procurement department, because they're 2 different paper processes, both needed to be completed to be able to sign off this deal. So I think the proactivity was also helped by the project manager, who was a coach/champion, introducing us to the right people to get the technical sign-off was very helpful. But we did a huge amount of chunks of the legwork before we even started the proof of value, actually, because we had to go through a workers' council to be signed off to even start. So lots of the legwork was done in advance.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's everything, because that proactivity there empowers you to do things parallel that otherwise you can only start much later, right? And especially at that time in a year, that puts your deal at risk of slipping, and that's never a good thing, is it?
And I think ultimately they want to be involved in that. And the project manager, he doesn't want to get to the end of this whole thing, and neither does our champion, and it flops at the very last minute because we weren't proactive enough. So asking for those introductions didn't feel like too much, or didn't feel like I was pushing my relationship with them. It seemed totally fair, and it was met with complete understanding and introductions, which was good.
Right. No, amazing. So, hey, we're getting up to the end of this conversation. This has been great, but I do have some closing questions for you before we wrap up. The first one is like, hey, what is like your biggest learning from this deal? Single biggest learning?
That champions are everything, and without them, that we would never get anything complete. And there's multiple champions in a deal, and that's fantastic. And I know you want just one, but I have one other one, which is just raising conversations internally, and having, for the last 8 weeks of the deal, we had a conversation every week with multiple people from my side, like my global head of sales, my VP, my director, my everyone would be on that call, Alex, the technical team. And it was super important to have those calls to not only give updates internally, but also to be questioned on what I was doing. And like, ultimately, as the account director, you're the project manager, I'm the one closing this deal with everyone's help. It's not just me, but to be questioned and say, have you thought about that? And to be challenged on the things and raise the problems in advance made a massive difference so that I never was on the back foot when they did come up with the customer. So that was a really, really good thing that I learned. And I think that was a great learning curve for me.
Yeah, no, I love that you sort of broke my ask there and went into multiple learnings, because it's great. What you're talking about there is like ownership, right? I think that in our industry, we typically put the onus, or we tend to think that the onus is on the AE or the seller, right? But what great deal ever comes together just by by way of the seller working on their own, and so. That's a massive insight. And again, a compliment, I think, to the culture that Darktrace has already created, so that you as a seller don't feel like, hey, I need to do this on my own, but I actually have like this whole collective of incredibly smart and brilliant people that I can rely on and collaborate with to get things like this done that change the trajectory of both your business as well as the customers.
Exactly.
The other thing is what advice would you give yourself from 5 years ago, knowing what you know now?
I mean, anyone in sales will know this, but don't ever take no personally. Like, it doesn't matter, and you'll find another deal and you'll learn from it. And just learning from mistakes is so important. And actually going back and reflecting, what could I have done better, I think has made me a much better salesperson. And I think probably took me to exactly the right place to then start doing this deal and doing it, I'd say, well. And it was an absolute pleasure to run. And I'm looking forward to running another one, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, then that sounds lovely. I think that's great advice. And also, like the first no is typically the start of a yes, right? So, there's data behind it.
Questions are good things. When someone's asking you lots of questions, they're really interested. They're not challenging you. They're actually interested. So I think that's good as well.
Yeah, we need to embrace that. No, I think that was great. And the real interesting thing about this, as you said in the beginning, is that the deal happened pre-MEDDPICC for you.
Yes.
We're reviewing it with MEDDPICC. I would love to invite you to come back on in, say, a year where you've used the framework and everything that it brings for you, and see where we are then.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thanks so much, Pim.
Well, thanks for being with us today and making this another great episode. So that was the end of the episode with Harriet. Thank you very much for being here with us today. And until next time.